Hey team, welcome back to Game Time. I'm your host and coaching teammate, Shauna Griffiths, and I'm grateful to have you here with me today for a conversation with an impactful leader who I am grateful to know, to becoming friends with, and to count as a 2025 leadership athlete. I drafted him along with his brother, who you'll hear about as we get into the show. If you are new to the show, I know you care about leadership or you wouldn't be here with us today. So just know that every episode is designed to help you take your leadership game to the next level. Because I believe that leadership is a sport and that we have the decision to operate as a leadership athlete would. So you have these characteristics that are similar to the characteristics you see in play in high performing athletes, same as with high performing business people. Which brings me to my guest today, Jon Schwartz. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, Shauna.
Yeah. So I always start out by letting you all, my audience, know how I know my guests. So as I mentioned, John's brother Andrew was on the show in December, helped me launch the rebranded Game Time. And I remember John Andrew, it was so funny. We were talking and he was like, "Well, you know my brother, right?" And it was like this kind of sense of pride, the way he was talking. This is the way he referenced you. And I was like, "Yes, of course I know of him. I don't know him yet." And he was like, "Oh, I'll take care of that. I'll introduce you." So it was just so nice to see that. I could just tell the camaraderie and the pride in each other, and just your careers in the sports business industry has been amazing.
Thank you. It's funny where we ended up. We both ended up in sports, and we started out in sports and sort of weave throughout our careers. And it's I'm very fortunate to have him in my life. He's a great advisor. He's my younger brother, but I think he gives me more advice than I give him. So I'm really
Oh, I
blessed to have him.
that's awesome. I love that. I'm really close to my older sister. So I'm like sort of feeling that. I know what that feels like, and it's so awesome to see that in the both of you. But today you're the managing director and head of sports for Prosek. You are doing amazing things, advocate in the disabled athlete space. We'll talk about that as well. And your career has been just such a, I was kind of thinking about it like this tear of goodness. I mean, NFL, NASCAR, Bank of America, Mastercard, and on and on. And so it's just so great to see your journey, because I think a lot of times people get on these tracks, or they think that's the only way to work in the sports field is to work for a team or a property. So I'm really glad to have you here today. So tell us, like, set the foundation for the audience. What is it that you're doing every day with Prosec?
Yeah, so we're strategic advisors to sports owners and operators, uh, entities that have equity in teams, leagues, sanctioning bodies, etc. Lots of investors in sports. You know, sports is an asset class, so uh, the landscape is changing by the day. We represent a number of brands that are invested in sports as sponsors, a few sports properties, and we've got an offering here called Athletes in Business. So today, more and more professional athletes are starting second careers in the midst of their first careers. And so with the onset of NIL, you know, you could, if you're a high school athlete in some states, you can get NIL money, name, image, and likeness money, compensation for people using your NIL. And so college, for sure, that athletes are NIL eligible. But what's happening is that they're becoming athletes, student athletes in high school and college are becoming familiar with business. And by the time they reach the pros, they're sort of thinking about, okay, I've got a signing bonus, I've got this much amount of salary. What's next, right? You know, the average tenure of an NFL player is somewhere around 3 years. So you think about, what that means for someone and how important it is to sort of set yourself up for the next thing. And if you rewind 20 years, you look at the NFL, the NBA, and some of the other leagues, they were spending a lot of time in their rookie symposiums doing financial literacy. And now it's more about like, okay, so how do you build your brand? How do you build your business? How do you attract investors? It's a much more sophisticated and student athlete or professional athlete, significantly much more than 20 years ago.
Yeah, it makes so much sense when you're saying that. It's funny because I have this vague recollection of there was an athlete who, and this is like a long time ago, right? So before this move started, where athletes were being more involved as business people during their career, I want to say it was someone like, like Derrick Rose or something, who had an app. Who it was like he was one of the first who was playing in the tech space. I might have completely gotten who it was wrong, but I just remember it significantly shifted from those who would end their professional careers and then tendency to get into franchising opportunities or that. It is just a completely different landscape than it was for sure 20 plus years ago. It's changed even so quickly, even in the last 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, you look back to sort of the first one that I can remember who made a significant impact is Magic Johnson.
Oh,
Magic
yeah.
Johnson has ownership stakes in professional sports teams. He owns a number of franchises. He's a very savvy investor, particularly in underserved neighborhoods, and he's probably got his start 25 years ago, and it was a bit of an anomaly. And now, I would say 1 out of 3 active pro athletes have something going on the side, whether it's a foundation or a business they're starting, or they sit on a board, or they're investing strategically. And you're seeing that migration of the athlete owner. We're going to see the superstars of today, LeBron James and Steph Curry and others, sit in seats of power after they leave the court. And that part is really cool because, who better to have a perspective about what to do with a franchise or a league than someone who actually was in it, and in many ways were the faces of the league. And so that's what's exciting with our clients. We have a chance to represent a few pro athletes, retired and current, who are doing amazing things in business, and they're going to get the coverage from the sports media, right? They're going to, they've got name recognition. They're part of the lexicon of our culture as athletes, but we're not working on that. We're working on, getting them, pushing them higher in the consideration set for conferences and speaking opportunities, showing in the right rooms, and in front of the right audience, delivering the right message at the right time, so they can put themselves in a position to attract more investors, or to grow their brand, or to grow their business. And putting them. We had an athlete. We have an athlete that we put on the cover of Business Week. Current active NFL player, Austin Eckler, and it was fun because he's got such a great story. He's this incredible entrepreneur and connector of communities, and so it takes people a while sort of like bifurcate your view of this this person who led the NFL in touchdowns 2 years, and he's running a business out of his garage. It's just so cool and different, and it's been a privilege and an honor to work with some of these men and women.
Yeah, it's so great. And you just said these men and women. And I think one of the things that I've been seeing, especially over the last couple of years, is you're seeing female athletes be more involved like this. And there's just a tear recently. I think it was like Serena and Sabrina both investing in sports. And it's interesting because they're almost like having a bit of crossover. So not just a tennis player investing in tennis, but I think so it's just really interesting to see, and it's fun to see because I started working with for Nike with the WNBA in the very very beginning of the league. I think it might have been like the second or third year of the league, and so for me to
Wow.
see how far it's come, and how far the women have come with brands and with their I was going to say power as business people. It's just been exploding. It's awesome to see.
It's been, the growth has been incredible. It's been fun to watch. Looking forward to watching a little March Madness, women and men.
Yes, absolutely. I
And
love that. I know.
the
It's so
women
great to
weren't
see. I
allowed
love.
to use that term a couple of years ago, March Madness. And the tournament, the women's tournament now carries that moniker, and it's cool. It's about time.
Yeah, it absolutely. And it's really only been, I think, in the last like 2 years. So it's huge. So when you're out there working, if I'm right, you work at the intersection of finance and sports. Is that correct?
Yes.
So, so in saying that, where's the problem and solution there? What solution is sports bringing to the finance world?
Yeah, so I think you start with sort of like, who are those individuals that sit in the seats of power? And for years, if you're a sports fan, um, you know that the owner of your favorite team is likely, for decades, probably for over 100, years, has been a wealthy family member who has more than likely, and again, I don't want to make a generalization, but more than likely passed that franchise and the responsibilities that come along with it down to another relative, right? And so think about the greatest owners in sports. They come from these iconic families, and you still see that today. I think that the transition, the changes, is that we're now, sports is becoming an asset class. Sports is an asset class. And you're seeing entities enter into the space to scoop up equity, particularly private equity, private credit, and others, individuals who are looking to have ownership stakes in a team. And that's changing the game a little bit because you've got another party you need to communicate to that needs to be complicit in decisions. And it's getting a little complicated. And so the great part about your favorite professional team is that it's, at the end of the day, it's kind of a family business, right? And now it's a family business mixed with a family office, a investor from private equity, independently wealthy individual. It's a mix of everything. So it's becoming, the power and ownership is becoming a little decentralized, and that's kind of a good thing. And so helping those who are new to sports figure this crazy ecosystem out and nail their narrative and tell their story is the real opportunity. And that's what we do here at Prosek.
That's fantastic. So how long have you been there now?
It's about a year and a half.
Oh wow. And you've been in all these remarkable seats. And I said it earlier, NFL, NASCAR, you were at Bank of America and Mastercard. So it seems like where you're at now was this natural evolution. And so I'm curious, as you're looking back, was there a bit of I know where I want to go? Or did you create those opportunities? Like tell us a bit of how you got from there to here.
I feel like there was nothing natural about it. So the long story short is I went to the University of Maryland and I played on the club hockey team. The local NHL team, the Washington Capitals, were looking for game night interns. I became an intern for the Capitals. I met someone in the press box there who gave me a full-time internship, and I spent the summer in Pittsburgh with the Pittsburgh Penguins and all the teams they owned there. Came back, interned for the Capitals, and so I ended up spending a couple years catching the work in sports bug, and a job opened up in Baltimore, Maryland, for an expansion team for the American Hockey League. It's the top farm team for, it was the top farm team for the Anaheim Ducks. And I somehow, some way got the PR director job there. I dropped out of school because I fell in love with being in the workforce and I was tired of being a student. So I dropped out of college. Now, the lesson here is not to drop out of school to chase opportunities. I slowly finished my degree, and I have it from Maryland. I think the lesson here is what you think you want and need in the moment when you're entering your career and your career is getting going. It is not necessarily the expectation that's going to be met. And so for me, I thought I would spend 50 years as the PR director of a team that ended up folding and moving somewhere else. And I got called into the GM's office one day, and they said, hey, John, we have good news. We learned that lots of people around the league, lots of teams around the leagues are combining the PR director job with the play-by-play person, radio play-by-play announcer job. And we're going to do that here. And I said, my God, like, so cool. I'm going on the radio. No, you don't understand. The radio announcer is going to take your job, and you were no longer with the organization. And it was part and parcel to sort of like the economics. The team wasn't doing well, and so they were trying to save money. They said, but the good news is we will pay you through the end of the week. And it was on a Thursday. So there was that. But I think the lesson here is sort of like, it was hard to make sense of it at the time. You know, you drop out of school, you get this, what you think is your dream job, and then it gets yanked away from you. Oh my God, soul crushing. Because I didn't have a degree at the time, so I was slowly finishing up. So then I spent the next few years working on challenger brands in sports. I was in arena football. I was with the original XFL. We could do a whole other podcast on that one. Working for Vince McMahon and Dick Ebersol. I had a chance to go to another PR firm early in my career and worked on lots of different amazing accounts. And then I chose to go in-house for about 10 years. I was with a consumer products company, Mastercard and Bank of America, all sort of working on how do you maximize the value of sponsorships and articulate the reasons why your brand is invested in them. How is it driving the business? How is it impacting the community? How is it growing your brand? And then from there, I was recruited away to go to NASCAR, where I spent 7 or 8 years, and recruited away to go to the NFL, which was an incredible experience. And my last stop was at the Big Ten Conference. And you said there was nothing natural. There was nothing natural about it, quite frankly. There were many moments of confusion and concern and anxiety and worry and trying to figure out, is this the right thing? And where am I going? Where am I trying to end up? And, I think it's great to have in your mind a path, but ultimately, timing is everything. The circumstances you put yourself in is everything. The rooms you show up in is everything. And you have to sort of keep an open mind and sort of think about how this next thing for you is going to set you up for the next thing for you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love the way you talk about that, because sometimes when we look back at our own career, we can think, oh, I shoulda, woulda, coulda done this or that, or you forget to be honest about what you said was those moments of indecision, call it insecurity, not knowing what the hell you're going to do. And to your point, you said earlier about Andrew being such an advisor for you. I think it's really important. And I appreciate you sharing this out loud, because we are all working on our journey, right, over time. I am 48 years old and still figuring it out. We're all figuring it out. And I think sometimes people can think it comes so easy, or if someone's in a certain seat like you, that you had it all mapped out. So I love your sharing, so that people hearing this at whatever stage of their career, they're hearing it thinking, okay, I can take a chance. I can try something different, and it can work out.
And when I fail, I can talk about my failures. And it's something that is very hard for people to do, because we are in a social media driven environment. You've got this badge of honor for working in a certain place or doing a certain thing or having a certain title. And in some cases, a huge part of your identity is wrapped up into work. And there's great things with that. And there's a lot of not so great things with that, because when it's taken away from you, which has happened to me more than just that first time, it's really painful. So I was at Mastercard, and my wife was about 2 weeks away from giving birth to our twin boys. She went on bed rest, left her job permanently, and to raise our children. And we went out and we bought a brand new car, a little bit above our means, but big enough to fit 5 people. And I was feeling great. It was on a Sunday. Monday, I came in to work, Mastercard. They did 10% workforce layoffs at the height of the Great Recession. And I was out of a job. And because we were in the middle of this difficult time for the economy, particularly the banks were accepting government money, the job market was so incredibly difficult. So I was out for 9.5 months, and I filled my time with doing something that I loved, and I became a landscaper for that time, because I just needed to feel like I was contributing positively to society, and that job really helped me feel a sense of accomplishment. We work in this industry, right? And not every day can you sort of pick your head up and look back at all the work you've done and saying, oh, I did that today. I made that impact. There was a result today, and it was an outcome, and there was success. You can do that when you work a job, a dirty job. You're standing in a dumpster packing down brush for 3 hours a day. You really appreciate how the value of hard work, and you can see the results at the end of the day. And that little thing is hard for people who are younger, or maybe not younger, maybe newer to the workforce, who want this instant satisfaction. And work will not always deliver you that. So you need to find a way to get that elsewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. And your point about if you're in a role and then it's taken from you, because to your point, that happened to me twice over the last 5 years, and it is jarring. And I think that, to your point earlier about your identity, I think that there is something that it gives you this perspective shift of, does my identity need to be as interwoven with my job? And you hear people say it all the time, your job's not going to love you back. Your friends, your family will, and those type of things. But your job definitely doesn't love you back. I learned that one. But I also just really appreciate you sharing how you made use of that time. And it is part of your story. It does have an impact as the way you show up every day because of how you spent that time. I think is really important, because a lot of times when it happens, people can fall into that trap of just, I'm going to sit at my computer and work on my resume all day. I'm going to sit at my computer and just try to get a job all day. And I really encourage, do something in that time where you can, I know it sounds funny to say, but like, have an experience that can enrich you in some way. It might be work related in the same way, or it could be something completely different. Like you just said, you became a landscaper. You can actually use that time to work for you instead of just against you.
Yeah. I mean, you nailed it. I think that's absolutely right. And I had a chance to do that when I left Mastercard. My brother and I both coach disabled sports, and I had a little time on my hands. And so we decided, he and I came up with this idea that we would get a group of disabled athletes, one from every discipline in hockey. So deaf and hard of hearing, standing amputee, sled hockey, for the most part, people who do not have use of the lower half of their body, and special hockey, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. get them all together, because it was so hard for disabled sports teams, because they don't practice more than an hour a week, to get ice time in New Jersey in particular. It was very hard. It's very expensive, and you get it at crazy hours, because these travel and high school programs
Oh,
are buying big blocks of ice. So 1 hour a week, you're a small customer. So we got a group together, and we spent 54 hours in a row visiting all 54 rinks in the state of New Jersey. And we traveled over 1,200 miles. We started our journey at the NHL store in Manhattan, and we ended it at the Rock in Prudential Center, where the Devils were playing. And it was amazing spending that time with these incredible athletes, military veterans that were injured by roadside bomb attacks, and people who had never been able to hear anyone's voice, and special needs kids who, hockey was their only solace, and standing amputees that represented their country in international play. I mean, just absolutely extraordinary. That was what I threw my time and energy into, that and doing a little writing. And then I had another break later in my career, similar situation. I wanted to do something productive, and like a lot of people, I started a podcast like you. Wasn't as successful as yours, but it was a podcast. It was called the Sports Mentoring Project. It was a guest-based podcast, and I had a chance to interview some of the world's most incredible leaders and athletes and broadcasters. And my first guest was Joe Torre, the retired manager of the New York Yankees. Won a couple of rings there, more than a couple. And I remember it was my first interview, and my first question to him was, what does the word mentor mean to you? Because I really believe that sports is the ultimate form of mentoring, right?
Yeah.
So what does the word mentor mean to you? He stopped and he said, the word mentor means that you're trying to help somebody. That's it. It's that simple. And so that was a way for me to sort of stay inspired and be part of a conversation that might inspire other people. Yeah. And it had an ancillary benefit of keeping my brand out there. And so I say that to say is that the time that I spent, my downtime, working on resumes and looking for jobs, it was a little bit of a law of diminishing returns. You need to do that every day, but you need to be thoughtful about how you spend your time, because that will absolutely drive you crazy. Yeah. And you will not be able to see and be rewarded and be able to celebrate those small wins. Oh, and so that was what I did in those moments.
Yeah. And by doing that, you are a pro in communications that allowed you to continue to flex those muscles a bit and probably learn some new skills, tricks, whatever it was, to really help you pull those things out. And I think that's when people ask me, why do you do this show and stuff? Again, it was born out of a time when I was laid off. And to your point about staying relevant, making positive impact, keeping myself out of crazy spin of just apply. And it's so interesting because my coach, who I've worked with for years now, Leslie Harris, he will often say, and he's so right, that when we get into a space of like just applying and fixing resume and fixing your LinkedIn profile, he says what you're actually doing is hiding out. And it's actually, and I love that truth, because what's a lot harder is when you put yourself out there. To your point, what room are you showing up to? Who are you getting on a call with intention to discuss and ask for what seems hard for a lot of people? Ask for an introduction, ask for a referral, those type of things. So just really great real sharing about your journey, and I appreciate that. But I want to skip a little bit to where you're now, because I don't have tons of time left with you. But you are in this space of communications and media during a time when it is so cluttered, so noisy. There's more access than ever before, which is good in a lot of ways. I think it's helped women in sports. It's helped women in a lot of ways, or other folks. but it's also can feel crushing when you can't get away from the media. There's just so much coming at you. So sort of tips that you have about cutting through that clutter, or how do you, when you're trying to build a brand or send a message about something, how do you do so in this landscape that we're in now?
I think it starts with listening and understanding what the commander's intent is. So if I worked with a guy when I was at NASCAR named Tom Bryant. He was a Special Forces or Army Ranger. And he gave a talk to us one day, and he told us that, like, listen, you make 400 or 500 tiny decisions every day, and you can't go ask for permission every day. But if you know the commander's intent, what are we trying to accomplish? How will we win today? You can move forward with purpose and with conviction and take advantage of the opportunities as you manifest themselves, as they manifest themselves, and as you manifest. So I say that to say is that to break through the clutter, you really need to understand where you're going and how you're measuring your success and understanding what your goals and objectives are. If you know that, then you could build a story, a narrative that is compelling enough and different enough to be distinct in the marketplace, and build other activities around it that are different. People like new and different. People like human interest stories. People like brands and athletes and executives that use the power and the influence they have to manifest change or address a critical need. That kind of stuff will break through the clutter. Cutting checks and just throwing money at intellectual property to just be another sponsor on a long list it could be a useful part of the brand mix, but it will not help you break through the clutter. And so what can you do to go solve a societal problem? Use your power and influence and fame and money and whatever to address a critical need, to solve a problem, and then go out and talk about it. So we help our clients figure out a way to do that doesn't involve just simply stroking checks and starting foundations. And that part is fun because sports serve as a tremendous galvanizer of communities, and tapping into the fandom of society can help trigger a call to action. And if there's something out there that's sexy enough and different enough, you'll break through the clutter. We just had a client announce an incredible program with women's tennis, and it certainly broke through the clutter. And so finding a way to get to that is the real opportunity.
Yeah, that's great. That's super helpful. And then the other side of that, because that's assuming that there's a positive news to share, there's a story you're telling. The other side is crisis communications. And I want to make sure we hit on this because we are in a time where it feels like every time we're turning around, there's some sort of crisis going on. And we've seen it so much in big topics like DEI. You're talking about what's going on in the world. So are there any tips, maybe even if it's do's or don'ts, about even approaching crisis communications for people of all levels who are listening to this?
I think there are a few rules of the road that you can take, not just for situations that you're in professionally, but personally. One is never lie. Yeah. Never lie to the media specifically. You always have to tell the truth. As a comms person, you are often the chief investigative officer in the context of trying to gather all the information. It's incredibly hard during a crisis to gather information, to convene people, and to capture the will of that group in real time. Years ago, we say it's a 24-hour news cycle, and now it's like a 24-second news cycle, right? It's like there's stuff you need to keep up with every second. And so the other tip is You can solve a crisis by being prepared for one, having the materials. We produce, communications packs for our clients that have statements and communications that go out to all the key stakeholders. We do a series of like tabletop exercises that help us troubleshoot and pressure test some of the scenarios that might happen. It's hard to prepare for a crisis that you're in, right? Really hard. But if you can do it beforehand, and if you could find a way to open up those channels of communication in the moment and get the decision makers, it's getting the right and timely access to decision makers in those moments is absolutely critical. Because the last thing you want to do as a comms lead is making one of those 100+ decisions you make, small decisions you make every day. In a crisis, every one of those teeny tiny decisions means something. And that's why it's important to be prepared. That's why it's important to have access to decision makers. And that's why it's important to, follow your moral compass. You always want to be on the right side of history. You always want to follow your moral code. And being truthful and open and honest is the best policy. There are times where you will not be able to share everything, or there's times where there's coverage or something or chatter on social media that you won't like. And that's also part of managing it. Just sort of saying, like, picking your spots. So I don't know if that was exactly spot on, but hopefully it gave your listeners a little bit of a peek on what we do here at Prosek.
Yeah, it's super important. One thing I want to add to that is when you were saying it, it made me think also about part of being a leader that is looking the external side of it, but also the internal side of it. If you're a leader in a business or family or friends or whatever the thing is, and you don't communicate to your people and you're only thinking about the external part, you're missing half of the picture. And I think that in leadership seats, that is a huge Achilles heel. It's either lack of communication, silence, miscommunication, those type of things. I love when you said, just don't lie. You don't have to always tell all of the truths because you pick and choose. But I think it's just a really important, as we're wrapping up here, I want to make sure that we say that, because we talk so much about leadership, and it's like, how are you leading yourself and how are you leading others? That's both the external and the internal.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I share with my students at the Global Institute for Sport at NYU, a little plug for NYU. I've been here for about 10 years. Great folks. 3 things. One, everything communicates. How you show up. Are you on time? Are you dressed appropriately? What do your emails look like? Are your text messages prompt? Are you responding in the right way? Are you making good eye contact? Are you in the moment? Are you distracted? All of that stuff communicates, and it all sort of speaks to who you are. It talks about your brand. So the way you show up is the way people will perceive your brand. The other one is everything is important. You never know if you're being tasked or tested. So think about that in a crisis, right? Like, you never know, all those tiny decisions you make, you don't know if you're being tested or tasked, right? And so you want to, when you get an assignment or when you have to do something, you got to treat it like it's the most important thing you're going to do that week. And the last thing is everything is connected. So Shauna, we got connected through my brother Andrew, and all this ecosystem in sports, particularly, and in communications, is very interconnected, and it's also delicate, right? And so you have to think about those connections, and what if I do this here, it will have an impact there. There are positive outcomes of my decision, but there may be unintended consequences. And so everything communicates, everything is important, and everything is connected. That's what I'd probably leave you with in terms of, some of those key tips when you're navigating difficult situations.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for mentioning your role as a professor at Tisch. I'm sorry I didn't do that earlier. I'm glad you mentioned it because, again, you've given people in this your role professionally. You've shown what you care about. You've shown the impact you're making with disabled athletes. You're giving back in so many ways as a professor, pouring into that next generation. And I'm pausing on this because I really appreciate the way that you're walking this earth and in your journey. And thank you for coming here today and sharing. A couple things that really stood out to me is your focus on intentionality is really key. Everything you've talked about is showing up with intention, and that's where you can really cut through, so to say, as we were talking earlier. And then the other thing is just, we talked so much about what you're doing for clients, and we talked about big superstar athletes and big brands. But as we ended this show, we were talking about that this is the same thing that we as leaders of people and leaders of business, we also need to consider these things in our communication and how we're showing up. So it really came together, and it's given me a lot to take from this, and I believe that the same for the audience. So I just want to thank you again so much for spending time with us today and for all you're doing.
Shauna, it's my pleasure. I look forward to continuing to work with you, and to those listening, make sure to like and subscribe. This is a great forum, and I feel honored to be asked to join you today. And I hope if you're listening, you had a chance to pick up some little nugget that may be helpful. If not, just DM me on LinkedIn and we'll figure it out.
No, you've been amazing. Thank you for all you're doing. And folks, if you want to get in touch with them, again, reach out on LinkedIn and check out what they're doing over at Prosek. They are difference making. So thank you so much, everybody. Have an awesome day.